Welcome back to Trade Talks. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. And joining me today is Tony Zhang. He's the head of product over at OptionsPlay. And I think you're becoming our resident cryptocurrency expert. So let's jump right into it, because the Wall Street Journal reported this week that Goldman, a blue chip Wall Street firm, might actually be getting into the crypto exchanges and markets. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we've had an interesting few weeks in the cryptocurrency world. It really all started off with China outright banning cryptocurrency exchanges and initial coin offerings, and that essentially created a huge sell-off in Bitcoin, almost $1,400, which is almost a third of the value of Bitcoin.
Why did they ban it? Did they give any specific reason?
Probably because they wanted to get ahead of the potential ramifications of having a currency that's completely unregulated. This was one way to kind of stamp that out, if you will. Right. And then we had news like Jamie Dimon coming out saying that he thought Bitcoin was a fraud. And that really kind of snowballed from there. We had a lot of different CEOs and influencers coming out voicing their opinions about Bitcoin. And then lastly, we just had a few days ago Goldman coming out saying that they're interested in potentially getting into the Bitcoin exchanges. And personally, I find all of this mostly just to be noise in the bigger scheme of the viability of cryptocurrencies, but it has generated a lot of volatility, which is great for short-term buyers and sellers in this space.
Right. So more than China banning the crypto exchanges, there are higher level challenges as well in the cryptocurrency markets. Tell us what that might be.
Right. So there are some major challenges when it comes to the viability of this for the long-term use of an actual currency. And until these things are actually solved, and they're far from being solved right now, it's simply just an instrument for short-term buyers and sellers. And so right now there's three major challenges. Number one is regulation. I think China is a prime example of why regulation is a huge risk to anyone who's investing in not only in the cryptocurrencies themselves, but also in the infrastructure in trying to solve some of these problems. You had huge infrastructure investments that were essentially just wiped out overnight because of the regulations that China came out with. So that's a huge problem. Second of all is the fact that the exchanges that you currently trade cryptocurrencies on are centralized exchanges, which flies against the entire concept of Bitcoin, which is a decentralized system. So you have all of these traders that are currently trading this decentralized currency on a centralized exchange, which completely defeats the purpose of having a decentralized cryptocurrency. And lastly, for a currency to be a currency, it needs to be able to do two things. It needs to be able to store value, and you need to be able to use it to purchase goods and services. And currently, cryptocurrencies do not provide either one of those. So until these things are solved, it really isn't a viable alternative to the currencies that we know as today.
Right. Well, I mean, if you're a trader trading these, the headline risk has to be astronomical.
Absolutely. So from a trader's perspective, I actually think it's very interesting because classic technical analysis with price action and volume studies is actually still very viable for determining where buyers and sellers are. And I think this is part of why Goldman wants to get into this business, because they see an opportunity here. They are one of the largest currency dealers in the world. It makes sense for them to consider getting into this alternative currency.
But let me ask you this. Is Bitcoin filling a gap in challenged economies that their currency, for the most part, is worthless, or there's just a meeting for exchange there?
Absolutely. So there are some extreme conditions currently that provide us a view into what is the long-term viability of cryptocurrency. And I think Venezuela and Zimbabwe are good examples of this. These are both economies that are seeing hyperinflation, and their central banks have essentially destroyed that monetary system. And in these, so in Venezuela, for example, it's actually illegal to mine Bitcoins, and you can actually go to jail for that. But despite that, there are still people that are taking that risk because they have no better alternative. Same thing in Zimbabwe. They have food shortages and a currency that's worthless. So people have turned to Bitcoin as an alternative, as a system to barter for goods and services. So in these isolated pockets, we do see opportunities for Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies to come in and replace the local currency, and it provides us a view into what the long-term possible values are, because we see Zimbabwe exchanges trading at a high premium compared to what US exchanges are trading at, which gives us an idea as far as where these things are actually valued.
And that's how I wanted to wrap it up. I wanted to ask you longer term, do you think that cryptocurrency could fill that business need when it comes to banking, finance, settlement on a longer term, more macro level?
Yeah, so this is where I think instead of talking about cryptocurrency, we got to think about the underlying technology, which is blockchain, and that's really what powers all of this. And I think that's where all the businesses these days are trying to figure out where do they fall into that ecosystem, how can they take advantage of that. And Goldman is also trying to do the same thing, taking advantage of how can they profit from the concept of trading cryptocurrencies. And I think the fact that you can trade them, that there's a huge market for short-term traders in that space is going to provide a lot of short-term opportunities.
All right. Well, thank you very much, as always, for your insight on crypto. And traders, as always, thank you. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.